Hi, welcome to the Leaderonomics Show. Today we have with us R. Gopalakrishnan. Gopal spent 31 years in India's multinational Hindustan Lever and is currently the director at Tata Sons. Great to have you on the show, Gopal.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. With your years of experience as a leader, in Hindustan Lever and of course now in Tata, how would you define a good leader?
I suppose a leader is a guy who can make people want to follow him.
Mm-hmm.
There is no leader without followers.
All right.
And there are no followers without a leader.
So how does one become such a leader that people get attracted and follow this person?
I think people follow you when you touch their hearts. People listen to you when you touch their minds.
Yeah.
So you have to touch people's minds and hearts.
That's interesting. We talk about touching people's minds and hearts. What do you actually mean by that? How do we actually touch somebody's heart and mind through our leadership?
Human beings communicate verbally, and the development of the intellect is considered very important in all forms of education, which all of us go through. And indeed, what distinguishes a human being from animals is the mind. We give a superior status to the mind than to the heart. But what also distinguishes a human being is the heart. The fact that there are emotions and feelings. I don't know if animals have feelings, but they don't seem to express them in the way human beings do. And therefore, a complete human being can be touched only when you touch the mind and the heart. And leaders who speak to the mind are many, but leaders who can touch your heart are fewer.
Oh, that's a very interesting concept, and you wrote a book entitled "When the Penny Drops: Learning What Is Not Taught." And in that book, you actually expounded on. You talk about the three worlds: the inner world, the world of relationships, and the world of getting things done. Tell us a bit about these three worlds that you describe in your book.
We all live it. We all live our lives in a particular way, but we don't get a chance to reflect on where our minds and our hearts are at a point of time. Thank God, otherwise you won't be able to move, you'd just be thinking about your mind and your heart. But we live in three worlds. I think of them as three circles, which are overlapping and interconnected. So there are three worlds. One is my world. The second one is my world of relationships, other people.
That's how we relate to people around us.
And the third world is the world of getting things done. And we are moving from one world to the other all the time without being aware of it. And because of the unique pathways each one takes, each one is different.
Yeah.
So in my world, I have got my own ambitions, I have my dreams, I have my hang-ups, I have my concerns and anxieties.
That's right.
And those are mine. They never get expressed. Other people may notice it, but they are mine. They stay with me. If I have a phobia, that's in my world. The second is the world of relationships. No human being is an island. So everybody has to relate with other people. Even if you're not a friendly person, you have to talk to somebody. You have to get your food from somebody.
Right. So there's a constant connection.
There's a constant connection.
Yeah.
You're like a 24/7 internet BlackBerry. You're on all the time.
It's a good way to put it.
Some people get more messages, some people get less messages. And the third is the world of getting things done. All of us, there are 7 billion people on this planet. Everybody has to get something done to be economically useful. I'm leaving out a few unfortunate people. Even if you're a sweeper in a hotel, you have to get something done. You have to go to the stores and collect your broom. You have to go to the somewhere and collect your cleaning material. So everybody has to get things done. And those who don't get anything done don't survive.
Yeah.
So all the 7 billion people in the world, whether they are educated or uneducated, whether they are of this religion or that religion, whether they are this color or that color, are living in these three worlds. And each of these 7 billion people is setting a unique pathway. Like the fingerprint you have, like the iris of your eye, it's unique to you.
That's right.
And it is that determines your style of leadership. And that is the reference I have made in the book.
So when you talk about different styles of leadership, do you think that there is a particular style that is good versus a particular style that is bad?
I think since there are 7 billion people, I've just made a reference to the fact that there are 7 billion styles. And tomorrow, if there are 8 billion, there will be 8 billion styles.
Yeah.
But very broadly speaking, there are leaders to whose funeral followers will come. There are other leaders to whose funeral people will rejoice.
Yeah.
And I think there are only two kinds of leadership in that sense. I don't know how many people went to Saddam Hussein's funeral
Yeah.
or Hitler's funeral, if there was one. But how many people came to Gandhi's funeral?
Yeah.
Or whenever Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela dies.
So what is it exactly that you think the characteristics of a leader that they should have that would cause people to really admire and respect them even long after they are gone? What are the qualities?
I referred earlier to the fact that leaders speak to the hearts of people and that's how they get followers. And you're able to speak to the heart of a person if you've got a high degree of self-awareness. It comes from within yourself. And many leaders, especially if they have been successful already in a company,
Yeah.
in politics,
Yeah.
in bureaucracy, they become self-obsessed. They think they are moving the world.
Yeah.
And when you get into that mode, you cease to be self-aware.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, every time I interact with somebody, I'm having an effect on that person.
Yeah.
And if I cannot get the signal back, then I'm not self-aware.
Yeah.
And therefore, I believe that leaders who get followers do so by talking to their hearts.
Yeah.
They're able to talk to their hearts when they become self-aware and
Yeah.
they become sensitive.
Right. So interesting point about self-awareness. Leadership begins with self-awareness where you know your strengths, your weaknesses, you know how people perceive you. But the fact is that some leaders are not self-aware, so they have no idea that people are even resisting or rejecting them in their leadership. So how does a leader actually become self-aware?
I believe that leaders become, first of all, those who don't become self-aware soon reach a crash point and their leadership crashes. Either they are rejected or ejected or whatever. The key question therefore, how can you become self-aware without becoming a psychotic? You can't become a god man or a psychotic. We are not talking of those people. That's a different category. You become self-aware through following what I call a route of contemplation and reflection. I have referred to this in my first book called The Case of the Bonsai Manager, where I said that there are 4 stages in which our activities are carried out.
Right.
One is immersion. You're completely immersed in what you're doing. The second is action. That is, you do things if you're a TV commentator, you're an interviewer, you're a professor, you're doing things. The third is you have to sit back and contemplate.
Yeah.
And the fourth is you have to reflect. And if you follow this, immersion, operations, contemplation and reflection, then you become deeply self-aware of what effect you're having. And you automatically start to correct. For example, if I am a egoistic leader, if I am a sharp-tongued leader, and there are millions of them, including all of us, you know, all of us are capable in one way or the other. You ask our wives, they'll tell you. That's the best test of whether you are self-aware. Your wife will tell you the truth. You sit back and reflect and contemplate, and then you get an aha feeling. Oh, I didn't want to be rude, but it turned out that he thought I was rude. So I must change the way I speak to him.
That's right.
And that is the essence of self-awareness.
That's right.
I have referred in my second book, When the Penny Drops, to what I call the Clementine effect. Clementine was the wife of Winston Churchill.
Okay.
Winston Churchill was a very successful guy.
Yeah.
But he was a very arrogant, very egoistic, big talking guy. And one day his wife wrote him a letter saying the Second World War is going on. And I'm getting the stories that people don't like you to talk the way you talk to them. And my dear Winston, you know nothing in the world I love more than you. I don't want people to say bad things about you. Will you please mend your ways? And I've referred to that letter and reproduced that letter.
Wow. So he became self-aware.
If you want to buy one single ticket for self-awareness, get married.
Get married.
Get married.
Okay.
Your wife or your husband will always tell you what's wrong with you.
Right.
Now you can divorce her or him, or listen to him or her.
That's really insightful. You know,
It's pretty simple.
we have a lot of leaders who are aspiring to be great leaders, and some of them are good. Some of them think they are not too good. In your take, are leaders born or are they made?
No, they are made.
Made?
They are made.
You know, why do you say that?
I mean, we are all born the same. We are born, I'm a Hindu, so I believe in rebirth. So we are born with a certain bank balance.
Yeah.
But the bank balance is not in millions or billions or trillions. A few good things and a few bad things. Most of the actions that we take during our life are accumulated in that bank balance,
That's
either
right.
a debit note or as a credit note. And I don't think you can see hundreds of leaders who were not at all promising when they were young.
Yeah.
And you see hundreds of people who were very promising when they were young
Right.
and who turned out to be not leaders. So it is what you do that makes a leader
Right.
and not how you're born.
So it's not really the DNA, but it's
It's
how
not
you
the DNA.
develop and how you push
It
yourself.
has an influence, I'm not questioning that, but it is not the determining factor. For example, if I'm born very poor, without access to education, school, health, yes, it can be a severe disadvantage, but it doesn't determine. It's not the single biggest determining factor. It is the experiences of what you do that make a difference.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Gopal, for being on the show. It's a great
Thank you.
privilege.
Thanks.
We've been talking to R. Gopal Krishnan, Director of Tata Sons. Thank you for watching.